Hi everyone, it's Paul Manna here with another episode of Democracy in 5 Minutes. Thanks for tuning in. I wanted to start with a quick programming note. If you're a regular listener of the show, you may have noticed that new episodes have been coming out on a less consistent schedule of late. That's been due to some summer travel and other commitments that have popped up for me. Still, I wanted to reassure you that I'm committed to the show and will continue to keep posting new episodes with new ideas for you to consider. The schedule will just be a little less predictable for the next month or so. As ever, thanks again for your support and for listening. Now I'd like to get on to today's topic. In today's episode, I want to share some insights from one of the 4th of July events that I witnessed here in Williamsburg last week on the grounds of Colonial Williamsburg. If you've never visited, Colonial Williamsburg is the largest American history museum in the world and one of the largest living history museums as well. One of its main Independence Day events is when Thomas Jefferson, portrayed by Colonial Williamsburg interpreter Curt Smith, speaks from the balcony of the Colonial Capitol building. From that perch each year, he reads the Declaration of Independence and then comments on its importance. I attended this year's event and wanted to convey some of the ideas that Smith, as Jefferson, shared in those remarks. They offer important lessons that everyone interested in American democracy should learn. Let's begin with Jefferson's reading of the Declaration of Independence. If you've never read the Declaration, or if it's been a while since you've read it, I'd encourage you to pick it up and dive in. It's actually a fairly short document, a little over 1,300 words long. It breaks down into three main parts. First, the opening section states the core values that motivated the colony's call for independence. The second section, which is by far the longest, states 27 specific complaints about the King of Great Britain that provides evidence of his tyrannical rule over the colonies. I'd encourage you to study those elements of the document, in particular given that many of the issues animating the cause for independence in 1776 continue to remain highly relevant today. Third and last is where the document emphatically declares the colony's independence by saying, quote, "These united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states." One thing to remember about the Declaration of Independence is that it really was a radical, treasonous document at the time in its critique of the King of Great Britain, its proposal to break from the British Empire, and its assertion that people, not kings, are the ultimate sovereigns who rule. The people signing the document knew that they would be executed if the revolutionary cause was lost and the king remained in control. The stakes were huge and everyone at the time knew it. That's one reason why there was much disagreement in the colonies about whether a war for independence against Great Britain could succeed at all. We often forget that fact. Also at this year's 4th of July event that I attended, after reading the Declaration of Independence, Smith also used part of his time as Jefferson to remind everyone attending of an important truth and responsibility that they bear. The truth that he emphasized is that the Declaration was a grand experiment. It was a radical idea that the people could rule themselves, absent the leadership of kings. Granted, at the time, and as we've discussed in an earlier episode of Democracy in 5 Minutes, the people in the Declaration of Independence didn't really mean all the people. Yet still, even with that huge flaw, the document's rejection of rule by kings was truly revolutionary. Smith, speaking as Jefferson last week on the 4th of July, reminded the audience in Williamsburg of that fact by noting that even 249 years after the Declaration of Independence, the ideas it embraces still remain experimental. There always is a risk that the experiment will fail, he said. There are no guarantees. The implication is that American democracy requires eternal attention and vigilance to sustain the experiment today, next year, and many years into the future. On that note, Smith, as Jefferson, implored the large crowd assembled that everyone bears the huge responsibility of ensuring that the radical American experiment of rule by the people can continue and become stronger each day. He warned everyone in the crowd that they shouldn't want to be part of a generation of Americans that takes action or embraces ideas that will cause the experiment to fail. Instead, they should be bulwarks and protectors of American democracy so that it long endures. Overall, it really was a very powerful message to witness in person. If you were there somewhere in the crowd with me on the 4th of July, I'm sure you would agree. With those thoughts from Independence Day at Colonial Williamsburg in mind, here's what I would suggest you do with the ideas from today's episode. As I mentioned earlier, I'd encourage you to read the Declaration of Independence from start to finish if you've never done so, or reread it if it's been a while. It'll help remind you as you recognize some of its flaws and internal contradictions, even as you admire its eloquence, about how the nation began as an unfinished experiment that future generations, including yours and mine, would have to develop and improve. I'd also encourage you to take seriously the idea that the future of the experiment is not inevitable. The nation's tradition of imperfect yet hopefully improving rule by the people only will continue if we want it to continue. We can choose other paths, sometimes unwittingly, that can do harm to this grand experiment and lean towards authoritarianism. So let me implore you, like Thomas Jefferson did here at Colonial Williamsburg this year on the 4th of July, to be eternally vigilant and committed to the cause of democracy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness here in the United States or wherever you might live. I'd like to wrap up today's discussion on that important note. Thanks again for joining me for Democracy in 5 Minutes today. We'll get into some new ideas next time as we usually do. Until then, take good care, folks, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.